Redditors, what's the stupidest thing you've said to a police officer? I was pulled over 2 weeks after passing my test. The policeman asked me to wind down my window. I did. He then aggressively asked me what is it outside. I didn't know what he was getting at. So I replied cold? Dart. He shook his head and said no. Dark. Now turn your F-king lights on. I haven't been pulled over in years. You got a ticket this morning. I didn't think that would be in the system so soon. My response from a similar thread a long time ago. It was the 31st of December, 1999. A friend and I thought we were so F-king slick. We were standing by an ATM at the stroke of midnight. We thought that the Y2K virus was going to cause the ATMs to just start spitting money out. Right before midnight, a police officer, seeing us in our all-black garb, asked what we were doing. When we told him, he started laughing his ass off and told us he'd split the money 3 ways with us if it started shooting out. Sadly, none of us made any extra money that night. Got caught having sex in my Jeep in a restaurant parking lot. Told officer but she's so hot. Officer responded that's not a valid excuse. A few years back my mate and I were walking down the street towards the bars in our town, rural Australia. We were drinking from a plastic bottle filled with vodka and juice which isn't legal here and the police drove past us. I quickly threw the bottle in the bin but they saw us and pulled over. They 2 officers, 1 female 1 male, were taking down our details and we were drunkenly trying to get out the fine. I said we'll do anything to get out of this. She replied oh yeah? Like what? Then I blurted out dance for you? Apostrophe. My mate and I then proceeded to do about 30 seconds of the choreography to Michael Jackson's Thriller on the street, magnificently lit by their patrol car headlights. It worked. No fine. Close bracket. When I was 19 me and buddies were all out on an all-out drinking bender. We had a DD edit. DD equals designated driver. It's about 3 AM and we're all slammed drunk. Cop pulls us over for going 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. Cop walks up to car and immediately says, I smell alcohol. He asks everyone for their rides. I hand him mine. To which he is quick to hand it back. Sir, that is your debit card. I immediately start laughing because I knew at that moment it was a guarantee I was going to the drunk tank for underage drinking. I was right. Throwing party in my dorm room in college. Everyone in attendance was underage. 2 cops knock on the door. 1 male, 1 female. They end up being pretty nice and explain they got a noise complaint and will trust us to shut it down. As they were about to leave I asked the lady cop, aren't you going to pat me down officer? Double quote. Got a ticket. Semi-drunk me being escorted out of a bar by an officer at 21. Well, going to exercise my Second Amendment right and tell you to go FCK yourself. Cop as he begins to cuff me. Dumbus. That's the Third Amendment. My sober friend walking with us. Actually it's the First Amendment. I was about 6 years old and I had been home from school for maybe an hour. There was a knock at the door and I ran to go get it. Thinking my friends wanted to play. I swung open the door to see a female police officer and I said, nobody's home. And slammed the door. I realized my mistake and went and got my mom to answer the door. Turns out the officer had shown up to let us know that my dad had been killed by a drunk driver earlier that day. Turns out being embarrassed wasn't the only issue that day. I was smashed. Waiting for a bus. I wasn't making a scene. I was just visibly wasted. I could barely sit straight. So while I'm sitting there, kinda zoning out, 2 cops approach me and ask me for ID, which I somehow managed to find and show them. Then they started asking me what I was on. To which I responded nothing. I'm just really drunk. They keep pressing and yelling. They were furious for some reason. I guess because I was barely coherent. When one of them gets in my face and screams what did you take? To which I respond fucking ethanol. Edit. Cohesive. Coherent. Whatever. I was driving Uber in an unfamiliar town. And at about 3 AM, I asked an officer if there were any good donut shops nearby. Did you really just ask me that? Oh, that Starbucks is closed and I need coffee. Oh my god. As I realized the implication, in the end we had a good laugh and he led me to an open coffee shop. I actually ordered 2 cops to move their vehicles as they were blocking an entry to my site. Were I not on the job, they'd probably have ignored me. He wasn't a cop, but this is kind of in the same vein. I was buying a gun and had to fill out the application on a touchscreen they had. One of the questions was, are you now or have you ever been a fugitive from the law? I looked up to the man selling the gun and after I read the question aloud I said, who in their right mind would answer yes to that? Double quote. I thought it was funny but he looked at me coldly and said, you are seriously jeopardizing your ability to purchase this weapon. Yo. James. Hide the weed. Was in a field playing football, soccer, and thought it would be funny to shout this directed towards an alleyway. As it turns out, it's not that funny. Got arrested. Edit. Just want to clarify. There was no James. The only thing I've ever said to a cop was, do you have change for a 5? I want to buy something from the vending machine, and he did. Cop pulled me over because I had a tail light out. He asked where I was coming from. I said I was returning from a friend's house on this street. I looked at his badge and saw that he was the father of one of the girls that was at the same party I was coming from. I said, yeah, I saw Sarah there. She looked like she was having fun. The cop just gave me a look and said, get that light fixed, and he zoomed past me and made a U-turn to head to the party. I guess he didn't know his daughter was going there, or... After a night out, me and a couple mates decided to walk home, about 5 miles. After a couple miles the alcohol started to wear off and we thought about getting a taxi if one came past. We see something in the distance and being sure it was a taxi we waved it down and proceeded to try and get in. It was an unmarked police car and we were given an absolute bollocking by the plainclothes police officers inside. It didn't help when one of my drunken friends tried to be a smartass and said, prove it. Bought a really nice wooden box of cigars, wrapped in bubble wrap plus duct tape, and put in the trunk. The box was a gift for a friend. I do not smoke, and I didn't want to risk some damage during the trip to his house. Well, police makes me pull over. Officer asks me where I'm going. He asks me to pop the trunk. He opens it and finds the wrap box, which sort of looks like a bag of cocaine or heroin or whatever. He obviously asks me what's inside the wrapping. I say the truth. Cigars. He doesn't trust my word. So he asks me if he can unwrap it. I say yes, of course, officer. Point is, he can't manage to unwrap the thing. I have the brilliant idea of taking my utility knife from the trunk to cut the wrapping and just get it over with. Mind you, said officer was bent over with his head inside the trunk still trying to unwrap the Gordian wrapping, while another officer was standing behind me after having checked license and registration. I say, I found my knife while holding said open knife in my hand and pointing it towards the officer. I'll just let you imagine the rest. Edit. This was not in the US. By the way. BLBLBLBLBLB, no, actually scratch that. It was in Germany. We spoke in English though. Because I do not speak German yet. Long-term memory f-king with me. When I was a minor, a cop asked if I had been drinking. I said I had, but I wasn't drunk. Wow, it sounds even dumber typing it out. I remember some years ago, some friends and I were shooting a scene for a zombie movie we were making, and had stopped in this field a little of the road. There were like 5 of us, bloody, standing at various points in the field, and the rest conversing around the cars. When a police car pulled up, they asked, "What are you guys doing here?" Double quote. Cue my friend saying, "Oh, I lost my cat." They spent the next few minutes trying to help us search for the fake cat. It was a whole thing. When I was a 15-year-old who thought he was a badass, I told a cop, while surrounded by 3 others, "Why don't you put that little BTCH pistol on your hip down and we'll see how tough you really are." Double quote. If you'd ever like to know what it feels like to be tackled by 4 police officers simultaneously, give that line a try. Asterisk. After being stopped, rudely questioned, breathalyzed and my license rego checked by 2 cops, I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. They realized I was average Joe and explained I was in a known druggo area. I then asked them, oh, so that's why you were being so obnoxious? Double quote. Admitting guilt when they ask do you know why they're here? They oftentimes don't know why they're there. They're just following up on a call with loose information based on what an outsider observed. They don't know about the bodies. At a Halloween party in a 3rd-story apartment. Outside smoking, I see someone in a cop costume in the parking lot. Yell at him, who the F would dress as a cop for Halloween? He immediately broke up the party. When I was about 15 years old, a few of my friends and I were pulled over at around 3 AM, way past curfew, and we were all stoned out of our minds. The only other girl and I were asked to sit on the tailgate to answer some questions. The cop asks me, why are you smiling at me? This isn't funny. I respond with, I'm sorry officer. I wasn't aware I was smiling. Double quote. I was 18 and possibly high, long time ago. Can't remember, and when he asked for license, registration and insurance, I gave him my health insurance card. He just looked at me and said, what is this, son? I'm not your doctor. Never actually gave him my proof of car insurance. I had been gotten clean about a year prior and was with 4 sober friends in my car. I get pulled over at around 2:00 AM on a Saturday and tell myself, just be honest, you're doing nothing wrong. I roll down my window and the cop says, how long since your last drink? I reply, a year. I had to do a whole field sobriety test after he called me a smartass. My aunt had a terrible divorce when I was a kid. The type of divorce where police came to the house. One time 10-year-old me asked a cop, do you use the sirens if you have diarrhea? Double quote. He was a good sport and laughed a little and said, kid, I am not classified to tell you that. Then he winked so I would take it as a yes. No me but my in-laws. They were at a New Year's party and had a couple of drinks. My mother-in-law isn't much of a drinker, so she had a couple of glasses of wine early and then switched to pop and stayed sober to drive. They got stopped at a roadblock on the way home, and when the cop asked if she'd been drinking tonight, she replied, only a couple of drinks earlier than I switched to coke around 9. The cop laughed and sent them on their way. Was in my car at a park at night after it had closed, with my girlfriend at the time. Cops roll up right after we had finished in the back seat. As we were trespassing by being in the park at this time, I get out of the car to talk to the officer, and he grills me, asking about my girlfriend. He asks me, is she decent? And I'm thinking like, yeah, she's pretty hot, so I say, yes. Officer then goes and opens the car door and sees her still naked in the car, and goes, no she's not. Get dressed. He then gave us a warning and told us to leave. Crossing the border, and asked what I was going to buy. I said Coke. Americans are the best Coke. Double quote. I am Canadian. We no longer have vanilla cherry Coke. We were drinking at a provincial campground and there was no parking nearby. So my friend Craig parks in the fire access area that clearly said no parking. A cop shows up an hour or 2 later and asks Craig to move his truck. He already had 3 or 4 beers and told the cop so. I told the cop I only had 1 drink and have my graduated license and would move it if he allowed me to. The cop looks at me and says, alright. You look pretty good, and I reply with, well thanks officer. But I don't swing that way. The cop immediately turned bright red and walks to his truck to write my friend a parking fine and tells me to move his truck. Please note that I am a male. I was in the zone, driving 85 in a 70 and passing the only other car in sight on the right, 2-4, lane rural interstate, because they wouldn't get out of the left lane. All of a sudden there's a state trooper behind me. He pulls me over and asks why I am going so fast, and I blurted out that I was keeping up with traffic. Parked up with a girl and we are making out at a viewpoint over the city. Car comes speeding up and two guys in plain clothes hop out and pull open the front door and shines a torch in my face. He shouts it, "British plainclothes police officers," to which I reply I don't have any ID, as either he had said CID. He laughed, then ripped my car to bits looking for drugs. Turns out my car was very similar to the local drug dealers. College. A wee bit tipsy. Officer stopped and inquired as to why I was stumbling as I walked. Well, I pay taxes on this sidewalk, and I wanted to use the whole thing. You know, I want to get my money's worth. He didn't think it was funny. But since I was already in front of my house, he didn't arrest me for public intoxication either. Not a police officer. But shortly after 9/11 I took a flight for the first time. I was very nervous. Because I don't do well with heights and I didn't know what to expect. At the time, the airports were still staffed by men in fatigues with big automatic weapons. I went through security. And the metal button on my jeans set off the wand. So this huge, serious guy asks me, in his huge, serious tone, "Do you have anything in your pants?" Double quote. To which I replied, with a nervous chuckle, "Nothing you'll be interested in." Double quote. I got pulled over for rolling a stop sign while leaving a parking lot. When the cop asked why I rolled the stop sign, I told him force of habit. Double quote. Once I was pulled over for rolling through a stop sign. Cop asked me why I didn't stop completely. And like an idiot I said I thought I was stopped enough. Still only gave me a warning though. I was pulled over in Georgia for speeding. Officer asked, "You know how fast you were going?" Me. Nope. Speedometer only goes to 85. Officer laughed and told me to slow it down. Got pulled over. Officer asked if we had any drugs. Me. Drunk in the backseat said, "How much you want?" Luckily he was slightly amused and didn't take me to jail. Do you know where the Taylor Swift exhibit is? Anybody at the State Fair of Texas this year knows what I'm talking about. And the cop was happy to give me directions to it. And I was asking for a friend. So it's cool, man. It's cool. Still. Literally the dumbest thing I've ever said to a cop. Back in college, two of my friends and I were walking back from a party and all had to go to the bathroom. So we stopped and split up to pee. One of my friends and I just went to opposite sides of the road to pee and were fine, no issues. The other friend wanted to go pee in the wooded area so he wouldn't get caught. That friend had the misfortune of running into a pair of cops while he was peeing. So they have him detained and it's taking some time, so my other friend and I started looking for him. I finally find him and from my view it looks like him with his hands behind his back just talking to two people. It's really dark at the time. So I walk up to him, push him and said, "Hey man, we've been looking all over for you." He does the awkward "I'm in handcuffs and have no balance" stumble, causing me to look up and see the two people he is talking to are cops. Prompting me to say this gem of elegance, "Oh shit, they're cops." We were both underage but miraculously they let both of us go without a MIP and only gave him a UIP. Still remember when I was driving down a street normally fairly busy and you're lucky to even go the speed limit. But for whatever reason wasn't busy this time. So I opened the throttle up a bit. And sure enough there was a cop to pull me over. As he approaches I say, "Yeah, gotta give me one thing, officer. You're probably bemusing how you're writing me a ticket in the busiest part of town as much as I'm wondering how I just got a ticket in the busiest part of town." Double quote. He laughed. Still got a ticket. Not something I said. But something I did. I got pulled over for having a headlight out. When the officer walked back to his car, I remembered the last time my headlight went out. My friend just gave it a smack and it came back on. I thought this would be a great time to try it. I unbuckled my seatbelt and got out of my car. This made the officer very nervous. His spotlight was on me. So I'm not sure if he actually drew his gun, but he yelled at me to get back in my car immediately. I did. Then I realized what I had done. I don't get out of my car during traffic stops anymore. Spelling. To join the police you have to complete a test called the C test. I was walking back from work one day and passed a couple of officers on patrol and stopped to chat with them. I was in the process of applying and asked them about the test. Was pretty tired and not thinking I asked them how to pass the C test. Needless to say the looks I got of them were funny. Not me, but I have a buddy who claims that one time when he got pulled over, the cop took so long to come to his window that he was getting pissed. He was already late to sports practice and the cop wasn't helping things. When the cop finally came over he simply said papers. My buddy said back scissors, I win. He didn't get a ticket because the cop thought it was funny, but he did have to do a field sobriety test because the cop swore that no sober man would do that. My buddy was completely sober. Just a sarcastic tool. I got pulled over because my inspection sticker was out of date. The officer asked me what my story was for not having an up-to-date. It was a long story. I didn't think he wanted to hear it. So I simply responded, I'm a blockhead. Double quote. He looked at me kind of befuddled for a moment. And then said, okay, well that's honest, I'm just going to give you a warning, get it fixed. Double quote. I was stopped with two friends by police as we were cutting through a school property at like 3 AM. Now we were rolling out of our minds on MDMA and had also just smoked a spliff, so we were just all around FKed. Police officers stop us and ask a few questions since apparently there had been some robberies in the area recently. I answer the first few alright, but then he asks what color are your eyes? Dot. Now I swear to this day I heard him say, close your eyes. Double quote. They figured out we were high pretty quickly. I drove into the exit of a fast food drive-thru at 2 AM because there was a traffic jam from a club that had just emptied. When the cop asked me why, I said because I like tacos. Double quote. I was explaining to a police officer, he regularly came into my job to chat with myself and the other tattoo artists when I still tattooed, my route home from work. He expressed concern that all of my options for how I could walk home weren't great. I was like, oh yeah. I mean I carry pepper spray, so I guess that helps. Huh. I don't actually know if that's legal or not, but better than not carrying it. He just kind of did a double take before nodding. Yeah. You should probably hang on to that. Double quote. Still don't know if pepper spray is illegal in New York. But I know the state government changed the law recently-ish so that security guards could carry pepper spray without being an armed guard. Security companies immediately picked up on how terrible of an idea that was and put in their own contracts that guards would not be allowed to carry pepper spray. It's probably legal for regular folks. Shrugs. Get pulled over for speeding. Hi AF. Proceed to ask cop what a safe speed over the limit is to avoid getting pulled over again. Oops. Long story leading up to this. But I got caught shooting up in a Walmart for the second time. In the handicap stall sitting on the toilet when 4 police officers sneak in and kick the stall open. I was so sleep deprived I didn't even care at that point. I pointed to a few hundred Klonopin in blister packs of the floor. And then hesitated before pointing at the bag of cocaine. Those are my prescriptions. Officer. That's not. Double quote. On the way home from a good party. Very wasted. 7 people in a 78 Camaro. Complete with a rusted out bumper and pantyhose holding up the muffler. I'm the front passenger with my girl on my lap. Lights come on behind us. We are on a narrow street with no place to pull over, so the driver keeps driving. The cop finally chirps the siren, so he stops in the middle of the road. I somehow think that if I can get my girl into the back seat we can pull this off. I tried to push her back between the seats but she got stuck. Her legs and ass sticking up in the air. She's only 17. One cop asks the driver to step out. And I can't say what transpired there. Another cop opens my door and has his bright ass flashlight on me. Asks, have you been drinking? I say, yes. I'm f***ing wasted. A few minutes later the driver gets back in the car and we drive home. I don't know why they let us go. Show me a construction worker and I'll admit you are right, me to MR. Officer on a Sunday evening after 6 PM doing a very legal 65 miles per hour on the highway that had all of the barrels pulled to one side. Yeah. I got a ticket. Probably more for the sarcasm than the speed I was going. Got the police called on my house because I was firing a new black powder pistol I got for Christmas in my backyard. Rural Minnesota. Completely legal. He asked to see the firearm. I offered it to him. Barrel down. While gushing about its historical significant 4-week process of assembling it myself. He asks if it's loaded. I explained it is not. Nor do I intend to reload it as I'd have to discharge it again before the night is done. You don't unload black powder. He nodded a little. He asked if it was registered to me. I said of course not. It was purchased on the internet and sent in pieces. He got a little nervous when I said that. I explained it's commonplace with historical reproduction pistols. And there's no need to register them. He politely explained maybe now wasn't the best time to fire it. It wasn't illegal. But unwise. Because it's Christmas? I say. He shook his head. Because it's 11:30 at night. Your neighbors are terrified. Double quote. Well. It was non-verbal. But I was helping someone move some things out of their dorm. So my car was idling in front of the building. A bike cop rode up and motioned for me to move. I dismissively waved him away because I knew my friend would just be a minute. Whoops. He angrily tapped on my window and chewed me out a bit. Glad I didn't have any other consequences. Asking for a spear cube duel. If you're not familiar with speed cubing, it's basically solving a Rubik's Cube as fast as possible. Current record is 4:74 seconds by Mats Volk. I jokingly asked a policeman if he wants a duel and he apparently was too. A speed cuber. He had 28 seconds. I had 32. My friend likes to eat whole blocks of cheese. He also drives a car with really tinted windows because of medical reasons. So one time, he's speeding down a back road and gets pulled over. He's a little nervous but everything seems to be going well. The officer is just concerned about the windows. But since my friend has a doctor's note, it's okay. Once he's in the clear with the officer though, he pipes up and asks the officer if he'd like some of the cheese he's been eating. The officer says yes. And my friend breaks off a chunk and goes on his way.